Welcome to this module within the Policy Development course. This module is titled Parts of a Policy, Philosophy, and Regulations. I'm Bonnie McEwen, consultant with the Northwest District Office of the State Library. You're welcome to contact me with any follow-up questions regarding this class. You can refer back to this slide, or you can find me from the Contact Us link on the State Library's website for my contact information. In the first policy module, we looked at the need for libraries to develop policies, along with the role that library boards and directors play in that process. In this module, I'll recap those points and then introduce Policies for Results, a book from the Public Library Association. This slide points to some convincing reasons behind the need for library policies. I'll refer you back to the first module for a more detailed discussion about these reasons. For now, I want to quickly recap the first 2 points on this slide as a way to lead in to today's new material. Just a quick reminder about standards and board responsibility. You'll come to find that there are many connections between library operations and library standards. The publication showing here, In Service to Iowa, Public Library Standards, is a publication of the State Library and an important resource for boards, directors, and staff. As the slide shows, standard number 7 requires at a Tier 1 level that libraries adopt 4 required policies: circulation, collections, personnel, and internet use. There are lots of potential subtopics within the broader category of a circulation policy. Many you see on this slide, and these were referenced in more detail last time. Interlibrary loan is highlighted here this time because I'm going to use that specific policy as a way to apply the ideas from Policies for Results. And one more recap. In Iowa, library boards have a great deal of authority over library operations. Essentially, the 5 major responsibilities shown here referred to as administrative authority. From the Iowa Library Trustees Handbook, you'll see that developing and adopting policies is one of those 5 primary responsibilities. Library boards must be mindful that they adopt public policy for a public service. They should take care to avoid writing policies that are reactionary or punitive. Instead, policy development should keep community interests at the forefront. And once adopted by the board, the library director and staff work to carry out the policies and communicate them to patrons. So we've established that library boards have a great deal of authority over library operations, including developing policy. It's also true that the work of writing policy is collaborative work because it also involves the library director and staff. The chart you see on this slide is a good summary of the roles of the board, the director, and staff in policy development. And we'll see these play out in this class and in policy module number 3. So with that in mind, and with the book Policies for Results as the backdrop, let's apply these ideas. This book is from the Public Library Association, Creating Policies for Results. It's not a new book from PLA. It's been on the scene for several years, but I believe that the ideas in this book are evergreen. The book suggests that policy writing should really begin with a discussion about service philosophy. Why does the library provide a particular service or offer a particular program? That discussion lays the groundwork for what follows. Because policy development is a major area of board responsibility, the ideas in this book offer library boards, as well as directors and staff, a fresh way of approaching writing policy. So philosophy is the first part, regulations are the second part. Think of regulations as the rules of the road. What do library users need to know in order to use library services most effectively? Procedures are those things that the staff needs to know and do. Procedures are staff work routines. And think of guidelines, the fourth part of a policy, as best practice. Guidelines are the allowance to make exceptions to the rules for good reason, for good customer service reasons. We'll take each of these in turn, again using interlibrary loan as our example. In this module, we'll look at the first two parts of a policy, philosophy, and regulations. Again, the book Policies for Results suggests that policy writing should really begin with a discussion about service philosophy. Why does the library provide a service or offer a program? That discussion lays the groundwork for what follows. So you might be thinking, do we really have a philosophy behind what we do in our library? Of course you do. All libraries do, but too often philosophy goes undiscussed. Talking about a philosophy of service is seldom a deliberate part of the policy process. Therefore, philosophies are seldom written down. You can see from this slide that a service philosophy must be written from the community's point of view, from the point of view of library users, library patrons. And the last bullet point brings in the role of the library board. This first part of a policy, the philosophy statement, must be approved by the library board. So on to our example. Because philosophy answers the why behind a program or service, applying interlibrary loan is the example. Why then does your library offer interlibrary loan service? Here's one way to phrase a philosophy of service into a policy statement. The Evergreen Public Library values full and equal access to information. Resource sharing allows us to borrow materials from other libraries to fulfill individual requests that may not have widespread community interest. Moreover, our budget does not allow for unlimited purchasing. Therefore, Evergreen Public Library provides interlibrary loan service for all residents of our funding jurisdiction. That's just one way to phrase a philosophy of service, in this case, the philosophy behind a library providing interlibrary loan. Let's take a look at the second part of a policy then, which are the regulations. Regulations are the most common part of any policy. You'll find these in abundance. Not so much the other parts. When you think of regulations, you can think of a board game. When you open up a board game, inside the lid, you'll usually find instructions for how to play the game. Regulations provide patrons with instructions, with clear explanations about library services and programming, outlining what people need to know in order to use library service to best advantage. And because regulations directly affect patron access to the building, to programming, to services, it's rightfully the board's role to also approve regulations in the same way we want boards to approve the philosophy of service. Back to our interlibrary loan example. Here are some very common regulations surrounding interlibrary loan. These are things that patrons need to know if they want to borrow books from other libraries. Now, your library may or may not charge the allowable $3 for an interlibrary loan request, but if you do, patrons need to know that. You may or may not impose a limit on the number of items that people can request through interlibrary loan at any given time. But if there is a limit, patrons need to know that. And it shouldn't be surprising that if people lose or damage materials borrowed from other libraries, then they'll need to pay for those items, just as they would if the books came from their own local library collection. This is a logical regulation, probably not too surprising, but still a good thing to state up front. So again, these are just sample but very common regulations, things that patrons need to know to take advantage of interlibrary loan service. For now, with this module, we'll leave things here having looked at two parts of a policy, the service philosophy and the regulations. But I want to help to reinforce these ideas. So for just a minute, let's set aside interlibrary loan and look at a few other policy topics that are also good examples of philosophy and regulations. This is a nice example from Mediapolis, Iowa Public Library, a nice example of their philosophy behind building a collection and providing fair and equal access to that collection. As you read through these paragraphs from Mediapolis Library, you'll see some really important ideas here. Access for all ages, striving for a balanced collection by including all points of view, and the library board support of intellectual freedom. Now, your collection policy might be worded differently, maybe shorter, maybe longer, but I hope you can see that by starting with a philosophy, it leads library boards and staff into very important conversations. It leads library boards to supporting public library principles surrounding intellectual freedom. Public library principles that have been established by the American Library Association and endorsed by libraries across the country. This is a very effective and important philosophy of service behind a collection policy, thanks to Mediapolis, Iowa Public Library's example. This policy comes from Spirit Lake Public Library, and this is showing us the regulations behind Spirit Lake Library's test proctoring service. From the slide, you can readily identify these points as regulations because they are things that students need to know before using the library's text proctoring service. Some really important ideas here. Students need to ensure that a computer will be available at the library when it's test taking time. Students need to provide a driver's license or some other form of ID. Actually, you'll also see in the opening paragraph at the top of the slide, that looks like a philosophy of service. It looks like a philosophy of service because it is just that. It reads, to meet the needs of individuals and institutions of higher learning, Spirit Lake Public Library agrees to cooperate with area residents and institutions to support lifelong learning goals by offering proctoring service. The service is based on availability of personnel, facilities, and technology to do so. So this example gives us both regulations and philosophy. This example is from Ames Public Library, and this example is unusual because it not only serves up a good look at the philosophy behind the board conducting the director's job evaluation, it's also a good example of a policy topic that's not very often addressed. This presents a philosophy statement. This performance evaluation provides a basis for professional development, growth, pay decisions, disciplinary actions, and dismissal. In those two statements, this example from Ames Public Library answers the why question. Why does the board provide the director's job evaluation? This is very much a philosophical look at the reason why. Libraries certainly have HR policies, but how many of your libraries include a description of their job evaluation process along with the reason behind this being conducted on an annual basis? Here's another good example of service philosophy. This comes to us thanks to Sibley Public Library. I seldom find this topic addressed in small town libraries. It's the policy topic of social media use. It's seldom addressed in small town libraries, and yet small town libraries are just as active on social media as are large cities. So like the example from Ames Library that we just looked at, this is also unusual. This also sets up a good example of the philosophy behind the library using social media. And it's also another good example of a policy topic that's not very often addressed, at least not so much in smaller libraries in my experience. It's more often addressed in larger libraries, so to find this at Sibley Public Library is a great example. And here's part of the philosophy behind Sibley Library's use of social media. They say, through the library's social media messages, we are fulfilling our mission to inspire lifelong learning, promote new resources, and raise cultural awareness. Much of the content relates to libraries, books, authors, and the book publishing industry. Their policy goes on to highlight the library's goals: to inform the public about library activities, to increase the public's use of library resources, and to provide additional communication with the public. All of those reasons definitely are answering the why behind Sibley Library's use of social media. This is Sibley Library's philosophy statement behind their use of social media. Now, this is an example I like very much. An example of regulations surrounding a circulation policy. But this is also an example that takes on sharing regulations in a very interesting way. This comes from Waukesha, Wisconsin. And I like this because they've taken an FAQ approach. They've taken a frequently asked questions approach as a way to explain regulations to their library users. It's a friendly way of relaying policy information. It's very readable and it's very clever because the answers to people's frequently asked questions are usually policy regulation decisions. It's still good advice to post the actual policy in its entirety on your website, but this kind of an FAQ is just an interesting way to display policy information. It's a nice visual way of sharing policy information, and in doing so, you're providing some public education at the same time. It's thanks to Waukesha, Wisconsin Public Library. So this concludes this module as we've talked about the first two parts of a policy, philosophy and regulations. In the next module, keeping interlibrary loan as the example, we'll look at the remaining two policy parts, procedures and guidelines. This concludes this module within the policies course, parts of a policy, philosophy and regulations. Be sure to reach out to us at the State Library with any questions.